All right, so get ready. Today we're diving deep into Wetiko. I know a lot of you requested this one, and let me tell you, the source material for this deep dive, it's intense. We're talking indigenous American shamanic traditions, psychology, even quantum physics, all exploring this idea of Wetiko.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how all these different fields kind of converge when you start looking at, well, the darker sides of human nature. What drives those destructive behaviors?
Absolutely. And what makes this deep dive even more interesting is the author. They're exploring all of this through the lens of, well, being on the autism spectrum.
Right. So we were going to get this really unique perspective on how Wetiko might connect to societal perceptions of, well, anyone who's neurodivergent,
Right,
really.
exactly. But before we get too far ahead, let's start with the basics. What exactly is Wetiko? I mean, where do we even begin with a word like that?
Well, the word itself comes from the Algonquin language. It can be translated as, like, cannibal or evil person, but it's not really about individual bad behavior, not exactly. It's more like it's seen as this kind of mind virus, almost like a spirit or a force that can infect people.
A mind virus. Okay, so we're not just talking about someone being a jerk. This is something more contagious, something that spreads.
That's the idea. And it's not always a conscious thing either. People who are, I guess you could say, infected with Wetiko, they often don't even realize it's happening. They might think they're acting in their best interests.
But ultimately,
Their actions end up hurting themselves and everyone around them.
okay, so this is subtle and insidious. It started to make sense why people find this concept so unsettling. But how does this connect to the modern world? Is this just some, ancient myth? Or is Wetiko something we're still dealing with today?
Oh, the author definitely argues that Wetiko is more relevant now than ever. I mean, think about it. All this consumerism, the exploitation, the way we're destroying the environment, it can all be seen as manifestations of Wetiko. On a societal level, that is.
Wow, that's a pretty heavy thought. It's like those corporations always wanting more and more and more, even if it costs the planet.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're, well, possessed by this Wetiko force.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. But it's not just corporations. The author also talks about how Wetiko shows up in individuals, too. People driven by power, greed, that kind of thing.
So it can be personal too. But what about the author's experience as, well, someone on the autism spectrum? How does that all fit in?
Well, they dive into this idea that the way autistic people are often, well, othered, marginalized, it could actually be a form of Wetiko playing out. It's like society has this need to conform, a fear of anything that's different.
And that fear drives this mistreatment, this misunderstanding.
Exactly. And that's one of the author's big points. Wetiko feeds on division. It thrives in environments where people are pitted against each other, where there's a lack of empathy, a lack of compassion.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. But before we dive deeper into that, let's take a step back for a second. We keep talking about this concept of evil, this destructive force. But what does that actually mean? I mean, how do we even define evil in this context?
That's a great question, and one that the author spends a lot of time unpacking. They argue that across different cultures, throughout history, there's actually a common thread when it comes to defining evil. And it boils down to this: the disruption of harmony, the disruption of balance.
So instead of thinking of it as some abstract moral concept, it's more about the impact that actions have on, well, the interconnectedness of everything.
Exactly. Think about it this way. Indigenous cultures often talk about living in harmony with nature, right? Actions that exploit or damage the environment, those would be considered evil because they disrupt that balance.
Right, and in Chinese philosophy, there's a huge emphasis on maintaining harmony and unity in all things. Anything that throws off that flow is seen as negative. And even ancient Egyptian culture, they had this concept of Ma'at, representing truth, order, justice. And then its opposite, Isfet, represented chaos and destruction.
Yes. You're seeing the pattern here. It's like this idea of harmony versus chaos, it keeps popping up in cultures all over the world.
It's fascinating. But I'm curious, how does the author, being autistic, connect this idea of harmony and balance to their own experience?
Well, they actually challenge the idea of autism as a disorder. They see it more as a way of proceeding, or even like a place.
A way of proceeding a place. Can you expand on that a little?
Sure, they're basically saying there's not just one right way to experience the world. So instead of looking at autism as a deviation from some imaginary norm, they're advocating for a broader understanding of what balance and harmony really mean.
So it's about recognizing and respecting that there are different ways of being, and that's okay.
Exactly. And that's a big theme we'll keep exploring. How can we shift our perspective? How can we see neurodiversity as a valuable part of a more interconnected, harmonious world?
That's a big question, and I feel like we're just getting started. But one thing I have to ask, if Wetiko is this force of disharmony, this imbalance, is there anything we can do to fight it? Is there an antidote?
That's where things get really interesting. The author suggests the antidote might actually be found within Wetiko itself.
Wait, so you're saying the way to fight this mind virus is to, like, understand it better? Almost like we can use its own power against it.
That's a really good way to put it. And get this, the author actually brings in quantum physics to help explain how this might work.
Quantum physics. Okay, you might have to hold my hand on this one. I'm not, like, a physicist or anything.
No worries. It's not as complicated as it sounds, I promise. The basic idea is quantum physics suggests that at the most basic level, everything is connected. Everything in the universe. Like there's this underlying what they call a unified field, and all the separation we see in our everyday lives, it's kind of an illusion.
So even though it seems like we're all separate, deep down, we're all part of this, like, giant cosmic web.
Exactly. Think about it. Like when you reconnect with a close friend after years apart, it's like no time has passed at all, right? You just pick up right where you left off. It's like there's this deeper level of connection that goes beyond our normal ideas of time and space.
Oh, I've totally experienced that. It's like you're suddenly on the same wavelength again, like magic or something. But how does this relate to Wetiko
Mm.
and this whole antidote thing?
Well, the author suggests that this feeling of interconnectedness, the sense of belonging to something bigger than ourselves, that's the key. Wetiko seems to thrive on separation, on making us feel isolated and afraid.
So if we tap into that sense of unity, that connection to each other and the world around us, we're basically taking away Wetiko's power source.
Exactly. The author actually uses the term reverse engineering. Like we're taking this destructive force and figuring out how to use it to create something positive instead.
Okay, that is a seriously cool concept.
Yeah.
But what about the author's own experiences with, well, being on the autism spectrum? Earlier, we were talking about how Wetiko might connect to the way society views neurodiversity. But I'd love to hear more about how their own personal journey plays into all of this.
This is where it gets even more interesting. The author introduces this Maori word, takiwatanga, which means in his your own space and time. And they connect this concept to the quantum field we were just talking about.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. How do those two ideas connect? Takiwatanga and the quantum field.
Well, think of it this way. If the quantum field contains all of space and time, like quantum physics suggests, then maybe people with takiwatanga are experiencing this interconnectedness in a much more direct way.
So it's not about being disconnected or lost in their own world, but about being connected to a different part of that web, maybe even a different frequency of that unified field we were talking about.
Exactly. And the author suggests that this perspective on takiwatanga can help us build communities that truly embrace neurodiversity. Instead of trying to fix or change autistic people, we can learn from their unique experiences and perspectives.
I love that. It's like the very people who are often marginalized or pushed aside, the people Wetiko tries to silence, they might actually hold the key to creating a more interconnected, compassionate world.
That's the amazing thing about this whole concept. It's about taking what Wetiko sees as a weakness and flipping it, turning it into a strength. And by doing that, we weaken Wetiko's grip on us.
This is seriously inspiring stuff. So are you saying it is possible to create a world where Wetiko doesn't have this power over us?
It's a big question, right? The author doesn't claim to have all the answers, but they do offer a powerful place to start, recognizing the patterns of Wetiko, both in ourselves and in the systems around us.
So awareness is the first step. But what comes next? What can we actually do to break free from these patterns and create this kind of world we're talking about? So it sounds like it all comes down to choice. Once we're aware of this Wetiko, once we see those patterns, we can choose differently, right?
Exactly. It's about making conscious choices in our own lives. Like, the author doesn't offer some, 10-step program or anything, but they de-emphasize that personal responsibility piece.
So step one is looking inward, like examining our own thoughts and beliefs and actions, seeing if we're, maybe accidentally contributing to the problem.
Right. Like, think about it. Are you always putting competition first instead of collaboration? Are you quick to judge people who are different? What about your buying habits? Are you thinking about where things come from, how they're made, who's impacted?
Those are some pretty big questions. It's easy to feel overwhelmed,
Yeah.
what difference can one person really make?
That's where the whole idea of community comes in. It's not about being a hero. It's about collective action. It's about supporting each other, creating spaces where everyone feels safe and valued.
So it's a shift, right? From
Yeah.
me to we, remembering that we're all interconnected, that everyone's well-being is tied together.
That's the heart of it, yeah. And remember, there are already tons of people and groups out there doing amazing work, working to build those communities, to fight back against Wetiko. We can join them.
It's easy to get discouraged when you focus on how big the problem is. But you're right, there's so much good happening already. It's about finding your place in that, contributing what you can.
Absolutely. And even small actions can make a big difference, like choosing to really listen to someone, trying to understand where they're coming from, or offering help when you see someone struggling, or speaking out against injustice.
This has been an amazing deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much, not just about Wetiko, but about myself too.
That's the beauty of exploring these kinds of ideas, right? It can be a real journey of self-discovery.
It really can. And it makes me hopeful, even in the face of something as, well, as daunting as Wetiko.
Hope is essential. And this isn't the end of the conversation, you know? Keep asking questions, keep learning, keep connecting with others.
And maybe, just maybe, if we each embrace our own Takiwatanga, our own unique way of being in the world, we can create something truly amazing together.
Absolutely. It's a journey worth taking, one connection at a time.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those curious minds engaged.